Hello guys, my name is Michael and welcome to a new GTK tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to learn a little bit about signals and of course about the last four functions, which we didn't talk about them too much. Anyway, let's say the GActionGroup action added, it is just a function which basically emits this signal. And in other words, this should only be called by GActionGroup implementation, which means this is just an information to your application that something was changed, and this kind of information, it is different from monitoring a signal where the action added signal was catched, because you want to make an information only about that and not to really or actually make those changes. So in other words, to work with those four functions, we need to understand those four signals, which we have them. We have for action added, action enable change, action remove, and action state changed, which is very important. Now, how they are working, let's see. Let us pretend for a second that we are interested in the action added signal. This signal basically says signals that a new action was just added to the group. So this signal is emitted after the action has been added and is now available. Now let's see. Let us concentrate ourselves a little bit on this one. For this, let me compile and run the program for a second the way it is right now. As you can see, from the last program we basically saw what's the difference between changing the state or activating an action. Now I'm going to remove these things here because we are not interested for a second, and just before where we are creating the actions, I'm going to say gsignal connect. The instance will be GActionGroup, our group, because we are interested in our group. We need to know if something happens in this group. The signal is it is called action added, and of course the G callback, it will be action added callback, and the last parameter should be null. Now, as we already know from the signals, and if you don't, you should merely go and check my signals playlist. We know that we are not going to create a callback just like a random one. We are need to call, or better say, we are need to create the callback the way how the signal expected. So in this case, if we move there, we see that we need to create a user function which expects three arguments. The first one is the action group, the second is the action name, and the next one is the user data. So basically this kind of thing we need to create. So let us create it. Void, because it says right here it has to be void. Action added callback. So the first one, it will be the GActionGroup. The next one, it is the gchar action name, and the last one will be the gpointer data. Now one thing is for sure, GNUC unused. We are not going to use action group. We are not going to use gpointer data, so I'm going to mark them as unused because they will not going to be used. But instead, we are going to say not like this, gprint the action we don't know yet %s was added to the group. This is more than enough. Now, because we create this callback and we are monitoring basically the action group for changes, which means if something happens, like an action will get added, it should give us an information like the action with action name was added to the group. And because we are monitoring the signal before we create the actions, everything should happen the way we are expecting it. So let's see. As you can see, it works fine. It says the action select was added to the group, the action new was added to the group, the action open was added to the group, and the action close was added to the group. So basically, this is how you work with this one. Now, of course, one thing which is very important, it is that at this point, because we know how those things working, let us check this function GActionGroup action added, basically where it said this function should only be called by action group implementations and not in some other place. But just to be sure that you understand it, I'm going to call this function into a random function which I'm interested. Let me see if it gets called some of them. You know what, I'm going to call it in the create actions right here. Where is it? Let me scroll a bit. Let me close this one because we don't need it. Right here, watch, I'm going to call this function right here, which means some function gets added. We create it and we add it, isn't it? So I'm going to call this function right here. What do we need? We need the action group and the action name. So the action group, GActionGroup application, and the action name, which I'm interested in now, it will be new, or let's say open, whatever. Now watch what happens now. Let me close it. As you can see, we had, like before, the action select was added, group, and so on, and then we saw that the action open was added to the group. And now if I'm scrolling back a little bit here and I'm going to move this call basically after we create the actions, not before, so let's say right here, now you will see something very interesting, very different, which is kind of make the logic here. You see, now at this point we have no information. And why is happening that? Well, it is happening before because the create action was called and we are monitoring that information after, so we get nothing. So in other words, to make it work, you better call this function, and also you better monitor this information before you create the actions. Or if you basically are interested anyway later after you create the action, then I'm going to move now the call of the GActionGroup action added from the create actions, and I'm going to move it inside the item new right here. And here it will be quite tricky because here we need the action group and I don't have it, so it will be quite complicated. But instead that, I'm going to move it inside the let's see where I can yes, right here. It will be a good place. Let me see what happens if we call it inside the activate. Basically it is running after the yes. You see, the information works fine. The action open was added to the group, and this happens because we call this function right in the activate. Now we know that in the main function we are monitoring basically the startup and the activate signals. And if we swap these two calls, let me see if now is the activate before and the startup after, you will notice that it will still working, because it is not important the way how you are monitoring these things, the way how the functions are get calling when you create your application are startup is the first one and the activate is the second one. And because the startup is the first one where we are creating the actions and the activate is the second one, we can basically call the GActionGroup action added right inside the activate. So as you can see, the place where you call this function, it is the place where you make that information that the action group action added had or there are some changes. So I hope you understand now where the difference is between these things. Okay, now let us move to the second one, which I'm going to introduce you. Action state change. The same story. It is a function which basically emits the action state signal, change signal, and this function, again, you see, it should be only in the implementations used. So now let us work with this one for a second. So I'm going to copy this signal. It says signal the state of the name action has changed. So how it's working, I'm going to show you. I'm going to drop the monitoring signal of the action. So no, I'm going to let it. And now here we need action state change it and action state change it callback. It is the callback which we need to create. Now let us create this function. Again, we are not going to create a random function. We need to create a function like our signal expects. As you can see, we have 4 this time, 4 parameters: action group, the action name, the value, and the user data. So let me see how it's working. Void, not there, sorry. Void action state callback. And here we need basically the same 3 like before, but after the action name we need a G variant value, you see, like right here. Now let us create this function. What's interesting about this function, it is that here we get not that just action name but the value. So here I'm going to say G, no, not there, G print, and here I'm going to say the new state of %s, the new state of the action is now %s, and new line character, and here will be the action name and G variant get string, and here we need the value and null for its length. Now let me format it a little bit, and if everything looks good, let me see if I can compile it. And yes, it is compiling fine. Now the new state, it is indeed not called, and this happens because we are merely not changing to something else. So to do that thing, you need to activate. So if I click close, now it says the new state of the select is now close, and the state was changed to close. And basically this is what happens when you click the item, then this function get called. The same story goes now if we go back to our GActionGroup functions and we select the GActionGroup action state change it. Here basically with the help of this function we can inform our application that some changes took place. So let me show you. I'm going to move again inside the activate function right here, and here I'm going to say GActionGroup, it will be the application, and now the action name, which will be select, and of course the state. The state we need to create it. So now if I'm going to create a state here, G variant state G variant G variant new string, and here I'm going to say now close. So basically now we are informing our application that the state of the action got changed to closed, and this happens in the activate function. You see, the new state of the select is now closed, you see, and it gets changed, but you don't need to rely on this one, and you better be 100% sure that the things are not getting messy when you call this function. Anyway, you saw now how it's working, and you merely understand how these functions and signals works. Now the last two functions, which I'm not going to talk right now because it is quite simple to understand, that they are just there for you to help you to do the same thing, which means with this function you emit basically the action change enable change signal, and if was some action removed, and of course the signals here, the same story here. If you monitor the action remove and you create this function, basically you can print this parameter here and say that this action got removed, and you know which action was removed. The same thing goes for the action enabler changed. You can print the action name which was enabled or disabled by checking its Boolean state of the enabled parameter. That being said, thank you guys for watching. If you like it, please subscribe, share with your friends and neighbors, and until next time, see you guys.